Welcome to Echoes of the Unknown, the podcast where we'll be exploring some of the world's most fascinating unsolved mysteries. I'm Jack Montgomery, and today we're traveling back to the spring of 1981, where Keddie, California became the site of one of America's most disturbing, unsolved mass murders. The brutal slaughter of 4 people at the Keddie Resort has haunted investigators and true crime enthusiasts for decades. This tragic case was indelibly marked by investigative failures, compromised or destroyed evidence, and persistent questions about possible law enforcement protection of the killers. The Keddie Resort in Plumas County, California, was originally built around 1910. At that time, Keddie was a strategic junction for the Western Pacific Railroad, and the resort was built to accommodate railroad workers and travelers. Nestled in the Sierra Nevada mountains, it featured rustic cabins, a lodge, and a general store, becoming a popular summer destination for families and railroad workers. But over time, Keddie's significance as a railroad center diminished, and by the 1970s it had become a quiet, sparsely populated rural community. The Keddie Resort declined in popularity, and many of the cabins were rented out for low-income housing. Cabin 28 was one of several dozen cabins at the resort, and it looked like any modest rural rental. That's where Sue Sharp, a 36-year-old single mom, lived with her 5 children. She had relocated there with her kids in the fall of 1980 to escape an abusive husband back in Connecticut, seeking a fresh start for her family. Sue worked part-time at the nearby Quincy Elks Lodge, but she had recently completed typing classes at Feather River College and was hoping to find a better job. The Sharp family had been living in Keddie for only 6 or 7 months at the time of the fateful night of April 11, 1981. That Saturday evening started off as quite ordinary: watching TV, having dinner, visits from friends. Nothing at all suggested the incredibly brutal carnage that would unfold after dark. But sometime in the late evening or early the following morning, Sue was murdered. No, slaughtered, along with her 15-year-old son John and his high school friend Dana Wingate. Equally disturbing, Sue's 12-year-old daughter Tina had vanished. Sue's older daughter Sheila, who was 14 at the time, tragically discovered the bodies of her mother, brother, and his friend the following morning. She had spent the night at the home of their neighbors, the Seabolt family, who lived in adjacent cabin 27. The crime scene revealed extraordinary violence and brutality. According to the Plumas County Sheriff's Office, which handled the investigation, the victims were found bound with electrical cords, repeatedly stabbed, and savagely bludgeoned. Blood spatter evidence from inside the house indicated that the murders had all taken place in the living room. Thankfully, the 3 youngest boys, 10-year-old Rick Sharp and his 5-year-old brother Greg, as well as their 12-year-old neighbor Justin Smart, were discovered unharmed. They were sleeping in the boys' bedroom, located adjacent to the living room, and had apparently somehow slept through the entire massacre. The fact that the killers spared the boys, and the boys reportedly heard little or nothing during the vicious attack, has remained one of the case's enduring mysteries. Sue was discovered lying on her side near the living room sofa, nude from the waist down. She was gagged with a blue bandana and her own underwear, which had been secured with duct tape. She had been stabbed in the chest and her throat was stabbed horizontally, the wound passing through her larynx and nicking her spine. On the side of her head was an imprint matching the butt of a Daisy 880 Powerline BB pellet rifle. John's throat was slashed. Dana had multiple head injuries and had been manually strangled to death. John and Dana suffered blunt force trauma to their heads caused by 1 or more hammers. Autopsies determined that Sue and John died from knife wounds and blunt force trauma, and Dana died by asphyxiation. Among the murder weapons were two kitchen knives. A bent steak knife was found on the kitchen floor. It was covered in blood and appeared to have been damaged during the attack. A second knife, described as being a butcher knife, was also recovered and likewise had blood on it. This knife was later determined to have likely come from the Sharp family's kitchen. In addition, the victims suffered blunt force trauma, including injuries consistent with a hammer or similar object, but the actual weapon was not found at the crime scene. The use of multiple weapons during the extremely violent assault strongly suggested that there was more than one assailant. For the next 3 years, authorities had no idea what happened to Sue's younger daughter, Tina. Then on April 11, 1984, a skull and fragments of a jawbone were discovered by a bottle collector at Camp 18 near Feather Falls in Butte County, California. That was 58 miles from the Keddie murder scene. Shortly after the Butte County Sheriff's Office announced the discovery of the human remains, they received an anonymous call saying they belonged to Tina. Strangely, that was more than 2 months before the remains were positively identified as being Tina's through forensic examination of dental records. The bones, along with a blue nylon jacket, blanket, and scraps of clothing, were found in an area that had previously been searched with no remains being found. This suggests that the remains might have been moved there at a later date. The time between Tina's disappearance and her death remains a haunting blank space. Unfortunately, the Butte County Sheriff's Office failed to document that anonymous call. It wasn't until nearly 2 decades later, in 2013, that a tape containing a recording of the call was found by a deputy at the bottom of an evidence box. 2 primary suspects emerged soon after the investigation began in 1981. Martin Smart, Sue's neighbor, and his friend John Bo Bidet, nicknamed Bo. He was a former police officer from Chicago who had moved in with Martin just weeks before the murders. Martin was a military veteran known to have a violent temper, and he was reportedly furious at Sue for encouraging his wife, Marilyn, to leave him. He and Bo were roommates in cabin 26, located right next door to Sue's cabin 28. Bo was brought in by Martin after they met at a VA hospital, and he was sleeping on the couch in Martin's cabin during the weeks leading up to the killings. Some speculate he was hiding out from something, while others think he and Martin were planning the murders. Martin first told investigators that he was home watching TV the night of the murders, but he later said he went out for a late-night drive with Bo. Those contradictory statements raised suspicions with investigators. Frustratingly, very little meaningful progress was made in the immediate years following the Keddie murders. The initial investigation was widely criticized as being deeply flawed from the outset, either due to incompetence by investigators or a deliberate effort to ignore, mishandle, or bury early leads. The crime scene was not secured properly, evidence was lost or ignored, and key witnesses gave accounts that were not fully followed up. Tina Sharp, initially considered missing, was not prioritized in the way a kidnapped child normally would be. No arrests were made, and both prime suspects, Martin and Bo, eventually left the area. After over 3 decades of stagnation, the Keddie murder case was officially reopened in August 2013. That's when former Plumas County Sheriff's Deputy Mike Gamberg was hired as special investigator, and significant progress finally began. There was no dispute that the case was compromised by poor police work from the very beginning. In the immediate aftermath of the killings, law enforcement allowed neighbors and media to freely walk through the cabin, contaminating evidence and smudging or destroying potential fingerprints at the crime scene. Critical leads went unexplored, important evidence disappeared, and the young boys who had slept through the attack, Rick, Greg, and Justin, were not immediately interviewed. Plumas County Sheriff Greg Hagwood criticized the initial investigation as a classic example of a compromised investigation. Gamberg agreed, saying, "You could take someone just coming out of the academy, and they would have done a better job." However, Gamberg went even further, publicly stating that he believed the initial investigation was deliberately mishandled and likely covered up by elements within the sheriff's department at the time. The most damning evidence against Martin came from his own chilling statements. Shortly after the murders, he left Keddie and drove to Reno, Nevada. While there, he reportedly sent a letter to his wife, Marilyn, ruminating on personal struggles in their marriage, which he concluded by stating, "I've paid the price of your love, and now I've bought it with 4 people's lives." Years later, in a May 2016 interview in the Sacramento Bee, Mike Gamberg stated that the letter was apparently overlooked in the initial investigation and was never admitted as evidence. According to multiple sources, Martin reportedly also made a taped confession to one of his therapists at the Reno VA hospital, admitting that he had killed Sue Sharp. In 2016, Gamberg located a counselor there who said that shortly after the murders, Martin told him, "I killed the woman and her daughter, but I didn't have anything to do with the boys." The counselor reportedly alerted authorities at the time, but the original investigators deemed the therapist's report inadmissible or dismissed it as hearsay. There was a significant new development in the case on March 24, 2016, when a claw hammer was discovered in a pond near the murder scene. It was taken into evidence by Gamberg, who stated that the hammer matched the description of a missing hammer belonging to Martin. He had previously told investigators it had inexplicably gone missing from his home. Sheriff Hagwood, who was only 16 years old at the time of the murders and personally knew the Sharp family, stated, "The location it was found, it would have been intentionally put there. It would not have been accidentally misplaced." In April 2018, Gamberg stated that DNA evidence recovered from a piece of medical tape used to bind the victims at the crime scene matched that of a known living suspect. This revelation marked another significant development in the long unsolved case, since it specifically tied the crime scene to someone still alive. Authorities have kept the identity of the matched individual under wraps. Plumas County investigators have since identified at least 6 living persons of interest linked to the Keddie murders, though no names have been released publicly. These 6 individuals are connected somehow, either as participants, accomplices who helped dispose of Tina's remains, or who have direct first-hand knowledge. All are still alive, and investigators have said they better batten down the hatches. Gamberg also expressed his belief that more than 2 people were likely involved in committing the mass murder, or at least covering up the crime. Officials specifically noted that they have interviewed a woman who reportedly gave John Sharp and Dana Wingate a ride the night of the murders. Whether she's a suspect or a potential witness remains unclear. While both of the early prime suspects are now deceased, Martin died in 2000 and Bo a year later, authorities continue to analyze evidence to confirm or dismiss their involvement and explore possible accomplices. The team is pursuing interviews and forensic testing on DNA from the tape, hammer, and knives, and even voice analysis from that anonymous tip phoned in after Tina's remains were discovered. The goals are to either tie living suspects to these pieces of evidence or to expose links to a potential cover-up by local law enforcement. Mike Gamberg is not the only one who believes there was a cover-up. There have long been rumors that members of the Plumas County Sheriff's Office protected the prime suspects in the Keddie murders, likely due to Bo's background as an ex-Chicago cop. He allegedly had a criminal record and ties to the Chicago mob. This led to speculation that his prior status as a police officer might have led members of local law enforcement to shield him from deeper scrutiny or hinder proper investigation in order to avoid scandal or legal complications. While no direct evidence has publicly confirmed a deliberate cover-up by law enforcement, the combination of suspicious inaction, missing evidence, and official missteps continues to fuel the belief that corruption or protection may have played a role in the failure to solve the case. Adding to the mystery were multiple conflicting accounts given by Justin Smart, Martin's stepson and Marilyn's son, regarding what he experienced the night of April 11th. Initially, Justin said he did not see anything and believed he had slept through the murders. However, in later interviews, he claimed he had a vivid dream in which he witnessed the murders, seeing two men tying up and attacking Sue and the others, and even dreaming that he tended to her wounds. Under hypnosis, he shifted again, saying he actually saw parts of the attack in real life. He recounted seeing Sue in the living room with two adult men and subsequently watching John, Dana, and later Tina being killed. Justin's inconsistent and inconclusive statements made their credibility a matter of ongoing debate. However, some investigators believe he may have actually witnessed the murders, but psychologically processed it as a dream. Today, Cabin 28 at the Keddie Resort no longer stands, having been demolished in 2004. While that may have erased the physical reminder of this horrible tragedy, the case continues to represent one of the most significant failures of justice in American true crime history. The brutal murders of Sue Sharp, John Sharp, Dana Wingate, and Tina Sharp remain unavenged, their killers never held accountable in a court of law. That leaves a dark shadow over the pine-covered mountains of Keddie that persists to this day. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Echoes of the Unknown. If you found this story compelling, please don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share with fellow mystery lovers. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, even when justice is denied in life, the truth lives on in those who refuse to forget.